So let's go back to brain-computer interface. What would be, how would you explain this to somebody at a party if they said, what that sounds pretty high tech, but what is it?
Okay. Okay, so let's just break apart the terms. Brain refers to really any kind of thing that interfaces with the cortex or the deeper structures. The computer is a digital device on the outside. A lot of people now call this BCI, brain-computer interface for short. It's a very messy term because it could mean a lot of different things. But I think in a nutshell, what it means is, for most people, a system that is recording from the brain, whether it's non-invasive from the scalp or something that's fully invasive, like within the brain itself, and connecting those signals to a computer that analyzes the signal and then does something with it. In many cases of BCI research, the application is, for example, to remove a computer cursor. Or in the research that we've done is to replace speech, words, for someone who's severely paralyzed and unable to talk anymore. And so it's about interpreting brain signals and then using a computer to interpret those signals and then transform them into a form that's useful to us.
So in that example you gave, you're describing a patient with aphasia who can't speak?
Let me be very specific about that. So a lot of the work that we've done is on people that have a severe form of paralysis. And aphasia we typically refer to as someone who's got, let's say, a stroke in the language centers of the brain. Where we've focused recently is on patients that have a severe form of paralysis like ALS. So there the problem is they have largely normal language, but they can't get
Can't get the motor signal out.
Can't get the motor signal out to the vocal tract, the lips, the tongue, the jaw, the larynx. Those descending fibers are severely affected by ALS. They degenerate.
Yep.
And that's why people progressively become paralyzed and lose ability to speak.
And
an important part of that is that they lose ability to speak, but they still have full cognition.
Yeah. And for that individual, by attaching a computer to their brain, you're able to hopefully extract in written cursive text, whatever across the computer screen, what they're wishing to say?
That's right.
Okay. Let's talk about how that could possibly be done. You mentioned earlier there are at least two broad ways to extract that information. A non-invasive way, where presumably you're putting electrodes all over a head that's as well shorn as mine. Alternatively, a very invasive way where you actually remove the scalp and you lay these things on the cortex itself, correct?
Yeah. So the range would be EEG, which is where sensors are placed on the scalp directly, recording non-invasively. You can remove them at any time. And then the far other extreme is electrodes that are actually placed into the brain.
So with ECOG, tell me how many words per minute you could capture from a patient with ALS.
Okay. So what we did in our clinical trial at UCSF.
Was this the 2023 paper?
Yes.
Okay, this is the Nature paper.
That's right.
Yep.
So we published a paper in 2023. We worked with a participant named Anne. She had a very severe brainstem stroke about 20 years ago.
How old was Anne?
She was in her 20s.
Jeez.
It wasn't long after she had gotten married. Actually, just a couple months after her second daughter was born. She was playing volleyball with her friends, collapsed, taken to the hospital. She survived the injury. She woke up.
Was it a vertebral artery
yes, that's
dissection?
Exactly right. Yeah.
Okay.
Peter, you're
they're very. This is just such a scary thing.
Your memory from medical school is actually pretty good. This is impressive. Anne survived this stroke. She was left quadriplegic, meaning she couldn't move her arms and legs. But in addition to that, she couldn't speak. because the nerves that come through the brain, down through the brainstem, and go to the cranial nerves, which supply the vocal tract, those were also directly affected.
And was the paralysis a result of her cerebellum also having infarcts?
No,
No, it was all brainstem related.
just brainstem.
Good God.
Yeah, precisely the part that we call the pons.
Yeah.
So, so
Devastating.
devastating.
So it's for 20 years, Anne is now in her 40s, in a wheelchair, unable to speak.
Right. And so what we did was we did a surgery where we implanted an array of 253 ECOG sensors. These are the sensors that are densely spaced.
How many?
253.
Wow.
So we're talking about something about the surface area of a credit card, and it's filled with electrode sensors that are spaced about 3 millimeters apart. Each sensor is about 1 millimeter in diameter. And so basically you've got this credit card sized array that was placed on the part of her brain that processes words. In particular, the motor production of the words, the parts that control the lips, the jaw, the larynx, the tongue. Areas that were functionally disconnected from her vocal tract because of this stroke in the brainstem, which connects the brain to those muscles. And so we did the surgery. About 3 weeks later, we started our research sessions with her. We connected the cable. It's basically an HDMI cable that is attached to a head stage. The head stage transforms the analog signals from her brain. These are a small voltage. At the same time that we're doing all of this research, Peter, AI is developing in parallel.
Yeah.
All of these tools that we now are using every day, transcribing our voice right now into text, we use that technology. We can actually use those same technologies that generate voices, called speech synthesis. And so we've used a lot of the same tools, machine learning tools, that are in modern day AIs, and we're now applying them on the brain activity and trying to use them to not translate, for example, text and synthesize speech. But now the equation is different. It's translating it from brain activity into synthesized speech. The input is not text. The input is the ECOG activity across these 253 sensors. For days, what we would do is have a sentence on a screen, and we'd give her the start time and the end time, and during that, she would just look at the sentence, she's given a go cue, and then try to say it. Nothing intelligible comes out. She may or may not be moving the lips, jaw, but just try to say it. And that turns out to be very important.
Oh my God.
Like, you can't just think about it. You can't just read it.
Wow.
You have to actually try to say it. And that's what she did. So we started with a very simple vocabulary of about 27 words. The words that we chose are the NATO code words: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo. We did that because we could measure, basically, the accuracy of the decoder that was analyzing those brain signals and translating them into those 26 different code words. And on the first day, we were able to train the algorithm on, a data set of like maybe about an hour and a half to get to about 50% accuracy.
And does 50% accuracy mean she could get half of them right, or any time you showed her one, there was a 50% chance it would be correct?
Both. What you just said is, in our sense, identical.
Okay.
Like, so she's looking and then
But
trying
there
to say...
wasn't a bias towards a subset of them that she was always getting right and others that she was always
Actually,
getting wrong?
there actually was a bias.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, if I get into details, yes.
Okay.
Some of them were more discriminable than others.
And was it based on the number of syllables?
Yes.
Could you? Okay.
Yes. Actually, it was based on that in some of the phonetic properties. But one of the reasons why NATO code words for us was a really useful training task for us is because NATO code words were developed in the first place by the military to improve communication accuracy. The reason why we actually use those code words is because sometimes if you just say A, B, like D, Z, there's a lot of confusion. So that's why we actually use those code words. It increases the discriminability and intelligibility, where a lot of those settings you just can't make those errors. For example, pilots.
Yep.
In the call numbers, for example. So we use that because it has high discriminability, and on that first day, I think we got about 50%.
And this is going straight to voice?
No, this was actually...
This is going to text?
This is straight to text.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we're just trying to figure out, could we decode which word it was, and it was displayed in text. So
that's pretty amazing. That's the first day. 50%.
That's the first day, yeah. And then over the next, I would say about 6 days, the performance just got better and better. And then by about, like a week into this, she was up into the 95-100% range. So that was unexpected. It was incredible to see the performance increase, so quickly. But that did take a full week to do that.
Did you get a sense from Anne as to how her level of fatigue with this progressed? In other words, what becomes the bottleneck? Does it get easier and easier for her to go through this talking motion as she practices more? Is it just like any other muscle that we think of that has sort of atrophied and now she's sort of getting her talking back in shape?
Yeah, it is a bit of that. And we're trying to make that easier over time. I think in the beginning days, we were trying everything to get it to work. And a lot of it, again, has to do with this volitional intent to speak. That turns out to be the most critical thing. Peter, one of the things that I thought was really interesting also was we were doing so much decoding through these tasks that over time, actually a couple months into this, and it reported to us actually the strength of her orofacial muscles, her jaw, lip, tongue. They were actually getting stronger through this constant therapy, constant rehabilitation. And so I think right now everything is about just decoding the brain activity, to an artificial digital thing. But I do think that in the future, BCIs are also going to be a way that we can do rehabilitation, right? Like it's a way that we have this direct readout of what the brain is trying to do. You can essentially build a prosthetic that helps people speak, but in the process, someone who hasn't spoken for a while will regain some of that natural strength over time. So that's a new indication that we're thinking about in the future. How to use this technology actually to augment and accelerate rehabilitation.
If Anne had that stroke today, how different, if at all, would this process look if you were working with a person who hadn't spent 20 years or 18 years without speaking?
There's no question that I think it would work faster. There's less to learn. For her, not speaking for 18 years basically meant that she basically had to relearn how to speak, and we had to keep up with her relearning. Her brain was probably reorganizing, relearning actually some of those fundamental things. And she could see the feedback of essentially whether or not what she was trying to say was right or wrong. And it was very intense work. So we're trying to make that easier over time. But I think certainly the more preserved, the more recent, that activity is, those memories, the synapses we talked about earlier, the more stable, the more functional they are, the easier it is to actually decode them.
So what will be the ceiling for the current technology? How many words per minute and at what resolution or accuracy do you think the current technology because this was ECOG in her case, correct?
Right.
Where do you think it's going to go? Where do you think it could, where will this asymptote? I'm Peter Attia. This podcast relies exclusively on premium subscribers for support, which allows us to provide all our content without taking a single penny from advertisers. I believe this keeps my content honest, making it a trusted resource for listeners like you. As a premium member, you'll get immediate access to our entire back catalog of AMA episodes and all future AMA episodes. You'll get longevity-focused premium articles packed with actionable insights. You'll get unrivaled show notes for each and every episode of The Drive, every topic, every study, every resource from each episode carefully curated for you. You'll get quarterly podcast summaries where you'll learn my biggest personal takeaways from the previous 90 days of expert guest episodes and much more. This journey doesn't have to be navigated alone. We can take these steps towards a better, longer life together. Become a premium member today at peterattiamd.com/subscribe to join me in a shared commitment to a healthier future.